The morning fog clung to the Mission District like a familiar embrace, softening the harsh edges of gentrification that had crept through San Francisco's streets. Rosalind Fletcher pulled her wool coat tighter as she approached the shuttered gallery that had once been her life's work. Fletcher Gallery had been closed for 3 years now, ever since her arthritis had made curating impossible and her enthusiasm for the pretentious art world had finally died completely. She came here every Tuesday, not out of nostalgia, but because the building needed checking. The landlord was patient, but even patience had limits. Today, however, something was different. The familiar sound of spray paint hissed from the alley behind her building. Rosalind had every reason to be angry. Vandalism was vandalism, regardless of artistic intent. But as she rounded the corner, her breath caught. The previously blank brick wall was transforming into something extraordinary. A young man, no older than her grandson would have been, moved with fluid precision as he created what could only be described as poetry in paint. The mural depicted an elderly woman's hands, weathered and graceful, releasing a flock of paper. Birds that transformed into real wings against a sunset sky. The technique was flawless, the emotion raw and honest. Rosalind stood, transfixed, watching layers of meaning emerge with each careful stroke. "You're trespassing," she said finally, her voice carrying more curiosity than accusation. The young man spun around, dropping his spray can. Paint splattered across his worn sneakers as he raised his hands defensively. "Look, I'm sorry. I know this is your building. I can paint over it if you want." Rosalind studied his face. Dark eyes held a mixture of defiance and vulnerability that reminded her of every struggling artist she'd ever known. His clothes were paint-stained and threadbare, but his hands were steady, confident. Those were the hands of someone who understood art in ways that gallery owners and critics never could. "What's your name?" she asked. "Benjamin Torres. Everyone calls me Benny." He gestured nervously at the mural. "I know I should have asked permission, but I've been walking past this wall for months. It was calling to me, you know. Sometimes you just have to create something, even if it's not allowed." Rosalind knew that feeling intimately. She'd once felt that same desperate need to create, to contribute something meaningful to the world. Before galleries and business consumed her passion, she'd been an artist herself. "Tell me about the woman in the painting." Benny's shoulders relaxed slightly. "My grandmother. She raised me after my parents died. Always said that art was the only thing that could never be taken away from you, even when everything else falls apart. She passed last year, and I've been trying to honor her memory somehow." The sincerity in his voice struck something deep within Rosalind. She'd spent decades surrounded by artists who spoke of their work in calculated terms, measuring every word for its potential impact on sales or reputation. Benny spoke about his grandmother with the same reverence most people reserved for sacred things. "The technique is remarkable," Rosalind said, stepping closer to examine the detail work. "Where did you study?" "Nowhere, really. Community college. For a year before, I had to drop out. Mostly, I just practice wherever I can find space." He paused, studying her face. "You're Rosalind Fletcher, aren't you? I recognize you from the old newspaper articles about the gallery. Guilty as charged." She couldn't help but smile at his obvious excitement. "You know my work." "Know it. You showcased some of the most important contemporary artists of the last 30 years. Maria Santos, Robert Kim, the entire collective wave movement. This gallery was legendary." Benny's eyes lit up as he spoke. I used to sneak in here when I was younger, just to see what real art looked like in a proper space. Rosalind felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in years. Pride, maybe, or recognition. Would you like to see the inside? For the next hour, they walked through the dusty galleries while Benny asked questions that revealed both his knowledge and his hunger to learn more. He understood composition, color theory, the subtle ways that context affected perception. More importantly, he understood the emotional weight that great art carried. The lighting system is still functional, Rosalind found herself saying, and the climate control. Everything's been maintained. Why did you close? Benny asked gently. Rosalind flexed her fingers, feeling the familiar ache. Age caught up with me. Arthritis makes it hard to handle delicate pieces. And honestly, I grew tired of the politics. Art became more about networking and investment potential than about moving people's souls. But you still love it. I can see it in your eyes when you talk about the pieces you've shown. She did love it, despite everything, despite the disappointments. And the compromises, she still felt that electric connection to authentic artistic expression. What do you do for money? Whatever I can find. Construction work, mostly. Some landscaping. I paint murals for restaurants sometimes, but it's not enough to live on. Benny's honesty was refreshing. I keep applying for grants, but competition is fierce. Most of them want formal education or established gallery representation. An idea began forming in Rosalind's mind, dangerous and thrilling. What if I told you I was thinking about reopening the gallery? I'd say you should. The world needs spaces like this. What if I told you I wanted to reopen it to showcase your work? Benny stared at her for a long moment. I'd say you're either incredibly generous or slightly crazy. Probably both. Rosalind laughed, feeling more alive than she had in years. But I think your grandmother was right. Art is something that can never be taken away. And maybe it's time I remembered what that feels like. As they stood in the empty gallery, dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. Neither of them could have predicted the storm their partnership would create. But in that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of great art and the promise of new creation, they both felt the unmistakable pull of possibility. The mural in the alley continued to dry, paper birds frozen mid-flight, waiting for the world to notice their beauty. The reopening of Fletcher Gallery sent ripples through San Francisco's art community like a stone dropped in still water. Within weeks of the announcement, the whispers began. Coffee shops in the Mission buzzed with speculation. Online forums dissected every detail of the unlikely partnership between the 78-year-old gallery owner and her 24-year protege. Victoria Chen had always been the practical sister, the one who'd chosen accounting over art, stability over passion. When she stormed into the gallery on a grey October morning, her designer heels clicked against the polished concrete floors like gunshots. Have you completely lost your mind? Victoria's voice echoed through the space where Benny was carefully hanging his latest piece, a massive canvas depicting children playing in urban ruins. The entire city is talking about you. They think you're being manipulated by some opportunistic street artist. Rosalind continued adjusting the lighting, her movements deliberate and calm. Let them talk. When did you start caring about gossip? When? My sister started making decisions that could destroy her reputation. Victoria gestured at Benny, who pretended to focus on his work while obviously listening. You don't know anything about him. He could be after your money, your property, your entire estate. He's been working here for 3 months, Rosalind replied evenly. He arrives early, stays late, and has never asked me for anything beyond art supplies and honest feedback. If he's a con artist, he's remarkably committed to the craft. Benny finally spoke up, his voice steady despite the obvious tension. Mrs. Chen, I understand your concerns. If I were in your position, I'd probably feel the same way. But I can assure you that my only interest is in the art. Victoria's laugh was sharp and bitter. How convenient. And I suppose you expect me to believe that a young man with no connections, no education, and no prospects just happened to charm his way into one of the city's most prestigious galleries. He earned his place here, Rosalind said, her tone carrying a warning. His work speaks for itself. The truth was more complex than either sister wanted to admit. Over the past months, Rosalind had watched Benny transform not just as an artist, but as a person. The gallery had given him structure, purpose, and most importantly, an audience that understood the language he spoke through paint and canvas. In return, he'd given her something she'd forgotten she'd lost, the pure joy of discovery. James Morrison arrived that afternoon for his scheduled interview, his expensive suit and calculating eyes immediately cataloguing every detail of the space. As one of the city's most influential art critics, his review could make or break the gallery's comeback. Miss Fletcher, he said, extending a manicured hand, I must say your decision to reopen has certainly captured the city's attention. That wasn't the goal, Rosalind replied, leading him toward Benny's collection. The goal was to share extraordinary art with people who might not otherwise have access to it. Morrison studied the paintings with the detached professionalism of someone who'd seen everything. Benny's work was undeniably skilled, but Morrison had built his career on understanding the subtle politics of the art world. The technique is competent, he said finally, but tell me, what's the real story here? What's your actual relationship with Mr. Torres? Benny, who'd been silent during the tour, stepped forward. If you're asking whether I'm sleeping with her for money, the answer is no. If you're asking whether I'm grateful for this opportunity, the answer is yes. If you're asking whether I deserve to be here, I'd say that's for the art to decide, not gossip. Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. And you, Ms. Fletcher, how do you respond to suggestions that you're being taken advantage of? I'd say that anyone who thinks I could be easily manipulated has never actually met me. Rosalind's smile was sharp. I've been in this business for 40 years. I know the difference between talent and exploitation. That evening, as they closed the gallery, Rosalind noticed Benny's hands trembling slightly as he covered his paintings. The pressure was getting to him, she realized. The constant scrutiny, the whispered accusations, the weight of representing not just himself, but her judgment as well. You know, she said, settling into the old leather chair she'd moved into the gallery office. When I first started showing contemporary artists, the established critics said I was destroying the integrity of fine art. They claimed I was promoting mediocrity for shock value. How did you handle it? I reminded myself that their opinions weren't about the art at all. They were about fear. Fear of change. Fear of being wrong. Fear of losing their position as gatekeepers. She studied his face. Are you having second thoughts? Benny was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes I wonder if they're right. Not about manipulation, but about whether I belong here. This world, these people, they speak a language I'm still learning. The only language that matters in art is honesty, Rosalind said, and you speak that fluently. Nina Valdez, who owned the bakery next door, had become an unexpected ally. She'd started bringing coffee and pastries during the morning setup, and her genuine enthusiasm for Benny's work had attracted a steady stream of neighborhood visitors. Unlike the art world insiders who came armed with preconceptions, customers approached the paintings with open curiosity. "You should see how people react," Nina told Rosalind during one of her visits. "They stand in front of that piece with the children playing, and they see their own kids, their own neighborhoods. That's not manipulation, that's connection." As winter approached, Rosalind found herself moving more slowly, her arthritis worsening with the cold. She tried to hide it, but Benny noticed everything. He began arriving earlier to help with the heavy lifting, staying later to handle the closing procedures that required steady hands. "You don't have to take care of me," she said one evening as he helped her with her coat. "I'm not taking care of you," he replied. "I'm taking care of the gallery. There's a difference." But they both knew it wasn't true. Somewhere along the way, their professional relationship had deepened into something that resembled family, not the complicated, expectation-laden bonds that tied her to Victoria, but something cleaner, built on mutual respect and shared passion. The breakthrough came during the gallery's first major show. Benny had completed a series called Invisible Neighborhoods, paintings that captured the beauty and dignity of communities that the city's rapid development had forgotten. The opening night drew an unexpectedly diverse crowd. Art collectors mingled with construction workers. Gallery veterans chatted with teenagers from the local high school. Morrison, who'd returned for the opening, found himself cornered by a group of young artists who challenged his initial review. "You wrote that Torres's work was competent but unremarkable," one of them said. "But look around. When's the last time you saw a gallery show that brought together this many different kinds of people?" Commercial success doesn't necessarily indicate artistic merit, Morrison replied stiffly. "Neither does commercial failure," the young artist shot back. "Maybe the question isn't whether his work fits your definition of art, but whether your definition of art has room for voices like his." By the evening's end, 3 pieces had sold, and a local school had commissioned Benny to create a mural for their library. More importantly, the gallery felt alive again, filled with the kind of energy that had made Rosalind fall in love with art in the first place. As the last visitors left, and they began cleaning up, Rosalind felt a familiar tightness in her chest. The evening had been a triumph, but the physical strain was becoming harder to ignore. She sat down heavily, trying to catch her breath. "Maybe Victoria's right," she said quietly. "Maybe I am too old for this." Benny looked up from stacking chairs. "Age isn't the enemy. Giving up is easy for you to say. You have decades ahead of you, and you have right now. This moment, this gallery, this chance to prove that art still matters. That's not nothing." Outside, the city hummed with its usual restless energy. But inside the gallery, surrounded by paintings that spoke truth in colors and shapes, Rosalind felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The quiet satisfaction of work well done, and the bittersweet knowledge that all beautiful things must eventually end. The whispers would continue, she knew. The critics would keep questioning their motives, but the art would remain honest and uncompromising. Long after the gossip faded away, spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a softness that seemed to settle into Rosalind's bones. She'd always been an early riser, but now she found herself lingering in bed, watching the morning light paint patterns across her ceiling. The gallery had been thriving for 8 months, but her body was sending increasingly clear signals that time was running short. Benny had noticed, of course. He'd started handling more of the daily operations without being asked, taking on responsibilities that went far beyond what any protege should shoulder. When she arrived at the gallery each morning, she'd find fresh flowers in the office, her favorite tea waiting, and the day's schedule organized with military precision. "You're mothering me," she accused him one Tuesday morning, finding him rearranging the storage room with unnecessary thoroughness. "I'm organizing," he replied, not looking up from his work. "There's a difference." "Benjamin Torres, look at me." When he finally turned, she saw the fear he'd been trying to hide. "We need to talk about what happens next." "Nothing's happening. You're just tired." The doctor said the medication would help with the arthritis. The doctor said many things. Rosalind settled into her chair, gesturing for him to sit across from her. "But neither of us is foolish enough to believe that medicine can stop time." They'd been dancing around this conversation for weeks. Benny had thrown himself into his work with renewed intensity, completing a series of paintings that captured the changing seasons in the Mission District. The pieces were his most sophisticated, yet showing a maturity that spoke of both technical growth and emotional depth. "I've been thinking about legacy," Rosalind continued. "Not just mine, but what we've built together. This gallery, this community we've created, it's bigger than either of us now." "Don't talk like that." "Like what?" "Like someone who's lived 7 years and isn't afraid of the truth." She leaned forward, studying his face. "You've given me the greatest gift anyone could offer. You've reminded me why I fell in love with art in the first place." Through the gallery window, she could see the mural he'd completed months earlier, now weathered but still striking. The paper birds seemed to flutter in the morning breeze, forever caught between imprisonment and flight. Victoria had been visiting more frequently, ostensibly to check on the gallery's financial health, but actually to monitor her sister's declining energy. She'd stopped making accusations about Benny's motives, perhaps finally recognizing that whatever bond existed between them transcended material concerns. "You've lost weight," Victoria observed during one of her visits, watching Rosalind struggle with the simple task of hanging a small painting. "I've lost appetite," Rosalind corrected. "There's a difference. The gallery's doing well, better than well, actually. You could sell now, while the value is high. To whom? Some developer who'll turn it into luxury condos." Victoria sighed. "To someone who'll continue your work. There are collectors who'd pay handsomely for a space with this kind of reputation." Reputation built on what? On the idea that art is a commodity to be bought and sold. Rosalind shook her head. This place was never about money. It was about connection. That afternoon, a group of high school students arrived for their weekly art workshop, a program Benny had initiated without fanfare or publicity. He worked with them on basic techniques, but more importantly, he listened to their ideas, encouraged their experiments, and treated their efforts with the same seriousness he'd bring to any professional critique. Mr. Torres, one of the students, a shy girl named Carmen, asked during the session, "How do you know when something is good art?" Benny glanced at Rosalind, who was watching from her chair in the corner. "Ms. Fletcher taught me that good art makes you feel less alone in the world. It shows you something true, even if that truth is uncomfortable. But who decides what's true? You do. Every person who looks at a piece and has a reaction, positive or negative, is part of that decision." He gestured at the paintings surrounding them. "Art isn't a democracy, but it's not a dictatorship either. It's a conversation." As summer deepened, Rosalind found herself spending more time simply observing. She watched Benny work with increasing confidence, his latest series exploring themes of community and belonging. She watched the neighborhood regulars who'd made the gallery part of their routine. She watched the way art continued to build bridges between people who might otherwise never have spoken. "I need to tell you something," she said one evening, as they prepared to close. "I've been working on my will." Benny stopped what he was doing, his hands freezing on the light switch. "Rosalind, listen to me. This is important." She waited until he sat down, giving her his full attention. "I'm not leaving the gallery to you." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Benny's face went through several expressions before settling on something that might have been relief. "Good," he said finally. "That wouldn't be right. I'm leaving it to the neighborhood, setting up a trust that will ensure it remains a community. Space, with programming for local artists and students." She paused. "But I'm recommending you as the first director." "I don't want to be director. I want to be an artist." "You can be both. The best gallery directors usually are." She smiled. "Besides, you've been running this place for months. I'm just making it official." That night, Rosalind went to sleep feeling more peaceful than she had in years. She'd accomplished what she'd set out to do. The gallery would survive, the art would continue, and somewhere in the world, a young artist named Benny Torres would keep creating beauty from whatever materials life provided. She died quietly in her sleep on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after she'd first discovered him painting in the alley. The funeral drew an unexpected crowd. Art world luminaries sat next to construction workers. Gallery patrons mingled with high school students, and Nina from the bakery handed out sandwiches to anyone who looked hungry. Benny spoke briefly, his voice steady despite his obvious grief. "She taught me that art isn't about being discovered," he said. "It's about discovering. Every day, every moment, every person you meet has the potential to show you something new about the world." The reading of the will surprised no one who'd truly known Rosalind. The gallery and all its contents were left to a newly established community foundation, with specific provisions for educational programming and support for emerging artists. Victoria inherited the family home and investments, a practical distribution that recognized both sisters' different relationships to material wealth. But the real surprise came in the letter Rosalind had left for the community, read aloud by her lawyer at the memorial service. "I spent 40 years believing that art was about creating beautiful objects for people to admire. Benny taught me that art is about creating beautiful connections between people who might otherwise remain strangers. Our age difference meant nothing because we spoke the same language, the language of creativity and hope." I asked him to help me remember what it felt like to be useful, and he showed me that usefulness has nothing to do with age and everything to do with willingness to serve something larger than yourself. The letter continued, "This gallery was never mine. It belongs to everyone who has ever looked at a painting and felt less alone. Everyone who has ever picked up a brush and tried to capture something true. Everyone who believes that beauty and meaning can coexist in the same space." Benny understood this instinctively. That's why he's the right person to guide this place into its next chapter. In the months that followed, the gallery transformed yet again. Benny, working with a board of community members, expanded the programming to include workshops for seniors, partnerships with local schools, and a mentorship program that paired established artists with emerging ones. The space buzzed with constant activity. The walls regularly rotated to showcase new voices and perspectives. On the anniversary of Rosalind's death, Benny unveiled his own memorial, a mural that covered the entire back wall of the gallery. It depicted hands of all ages and colors working together on a massive canvas, creating something beautiful from shared effort and vision. In the center, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, were two figures, an elderly woman teaching a young man to see, and a young man teaching an elderly woman to hope. The city's critics eventually stopped questioning the gallery's legitimacy. Some moved on to other controversies, while others grudgingly acknowledged that the Fletcher Gallery had become something unique in the contemporary art world, a place where commerce and community, tradition and innovation, age and youth could coexist without compromise. James Morrison, in his final review of the gallery's programming, wrote, "What Fletcher and Torres created together transcends the typical mentor-student relationship. They proved that art's greatest power lies not in its ability to decorate walls, but in its capacity to build bridges between hearts that might otherwise never meet." The paper birds in the alley mural continued to weather and fade, but they never disappeared entirely. New artists added their own touches over the years, layers of meaning and memory that turned the wall into a living testament to the power of unexpected connections. And somewhere in the gallery, in the quiet moments between workshops and openings, between creation and contemplation, the conversation between Rosalind and Benny continued, carried forward by every artist who chose to serve beauty over profit, community over commodity, and hope over fear. The gallery had become what Rosalind had always dreamed it could be, not just a place to display art, but a place where art could live, breathe, and grow in the soil of human connection.